Good morning, my friends. Pretty incredible to see everybody here. And on behalf of everybody at Recorded Future, thank you for making it here. We have people who have traveled from afar, and people who have traveled through the London traffic, which I'm sure could be equally exciting. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of Recorded Future, and as you can imagine, this is sort of the day of the year for us when we sort of get to interact with you guys that we sort of otherwise deal with in all kinds of different places around the world, but being in a room together, it's quite special, quite special. So in this room, we have some incredible people from across intelligence, across security, cybersecurity, of course. We've got journalists, we got analysts, we got a lot of smart people here. So I think we're going to have a lot of good chances to both in this room, but also out in the breaks to have some pretty incredible discussions. So that makes me super excited. And please, as part of that, really do that. Interact with the people you don't interact with on an everyday basis, and grab those Recorded Future people that you see and ask us the most difficult questions and challenges you can put in front of us. I want to sort of start off by saying thank you for the work you do. Obviously, we're all trying to use intelligence in clever and ingenious ways to try to secure the world, but really thank you for the work you do as part of that. So that is for sure something that we feel every day, and thank you. I'll be talking about securing the world with intelligence, and I think maybe the part that sort of really stands out here for me in this age, or this day and age here, which the prior speaker spoke about, how artificial intelligence is influencing all of this. I sort of put it this way: to reimagine intelligence in the age of artificial intelligence. The guys at the company was making fun of me for not being able to spell the word reimagining, so now I'm all messed up on how to even say it. But that said, I do like the word, because I do think that as we think about intelligence, imagine, just like even, we're already seeing a glimpse of where this is going, but assume and imagine that we have incredible artificial intelligence in front of us. What does that make intelligence? What does that make intelligence in itself? Does the adversary win, or do the good guys win? There's a lot to sort of unpack that, and I hope unpack there, and I hope that this conference will have a good chance of sort of get your brains going in some good ways of that. Our very good friend Mikhailo Fedorov, he's the Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine, that sort of owns a lot of their cyber and IT and just like a broad remit there. He's sort of an up-and-coming riser in the government in Ukraine. And again, really good friend of Recorded Future. He tweets here about the army of drones, that's his sort of making, I guess, is sending to the front line almost 2,000 blah, blah, blah drones here. These drones are equipped with AI, which automatically detects and tracks targets. And at some level, after 2 years, we're like, no big deal. It's like drones equipped with AI, and they're going to go kill not so smart Russian tanks. And but man, 5 years ago, this would have sounded pretty wild, wouldn't it? And it sort of tells us, I think, where the world is going, and it's going to happen fast in front of us. And let alone the fact that you look at these and they look like they're out of some Star Wars movie or something. That's the other part. And then on top of that, when this government official is tweeting this, he's sort of doing psyops at the same time versus an adversary. So this sort of mix, and I'll come back and talk more about this sort of mix of different types of warfare that I think we have going on in front of us. So pretty interesting. For sure, we are in this sort of AI frenzy here, and I liked it when Time Magazine sort of put all of this in front of us, and instead of talking about the most clever algorithm, they put up the people behind it. And I think that's compelling, because there is a risk that we get too excited about AI in the sense that it's about the algorithms. No, it's people. We're shaping it. We're proud at Recorded Future to be part about shaping our little part of this. And it's people, it's humans, it's all you. And let's not forget that, because I think otherwise we might even help taking it to a place which is not so great. But it is interesting when you put this versus sort of the backdrop of what's going on in the world, where I sort of, and I'll take it two different ways. So last year when I was here, I think I talked about sort of this theme that I've been on to, that the world is slowly migrating on to the internet. And over the next 25 years, we can expect the world to sort of become a reflection of the internet, be it sort of profound parts of the of society, being it power and currency and democracy and identity. And when these things reflect off the internet onto society and onto the world, we're in for a ride. And if you take that plus the geopolitical tensions we're seeing in the world, it could get pretty interesting. Just pretty interesting in some ways that I don't think we really have understood yet. And I also think that, so even just a month ago when I started putting together my thoughts about what I wanted to talk about here, I was like, okay, so geopolitical tensions are high, but it's probably not much higher than it was a year ago. But now, obviously, after the last month with what's going on in the Middle East and in Israel and Gaza, things are at a whole different level, and you sort of see yet another tinderbox that's on fire, and it's getting pretty uncomfortable. We'll come back and talk about that. All right, so this spring I had the chance to take the long train ride to Kiev to meet our friends there. We have a large deployment of Record the Future in Ukraine. And, for the, sort of with my own eyes to be able to see very, very, very far from any front lines, but still having the chance to see how a country had been, invaded brutally by a dictator who more or less woke up one morning and said, I want that country. I want to take it over. And the way that went about, and we've talked for years at Record the Future about this idea that we're going to see a confluence or a convergence, maybe it's the better word, of cyber and geopolitics and disinformation. And here it really became a convergence of war and cyber and disinformation. And now seeing the same thing repeated in Israel and Gaza, it is just pretty sort of amazing, and the sort of a school book example of where that sort of convergence was going. So there in, let me see. There we go. So again, we've been lucky being able to work with some incredible people in Ukraine. On the left, we have the guys from the SBU. You might have seen Ilya Vituk, the guy on the right in that picture to the left. Incredible mind in cyber. On the right, we have their National Cyber Directorate, and there's a whole bunch of other authorities. They've sort of also quickly, just like many other countries in the West, ended up with many cyber authorities, so it's a little bit to navigate. But we've had a good chance to work with them on some pretty incredible stuff. You might have seen this piece where we worked with on taking down this Blue Delta infrastructure that was targeting a set of, let's call it communications infrastructure, both for the government as well as the military. And obviously this sort of stuff is very satisfying. This one was in particular satisfying because it used a particular part of our sourcing that we're very proud of, and it sort of was able to sort of get to something that the Ukrainians had not been able to see on their end. And then when we dove into a collaboration that happened across like some 5 days or something like that, where the data sharing was going on in a way that I've never seen in any country. Record the Future has the good luck to work in many countries around the world, and everybody's always talking about public-private information sharing, and it seems like it's like moving in glue. But here, where things are happening at a pace of, I guess it's the pace of war, but pretty incredible, and you might have seen this also here. But which was sort of the official report cover of that. But to be honest, that part is interesting, and it's, when we are part of doing the work. The part that it really has been sort of compelling, I think, in Ukraine is how we've been able to equip hundreds, not thousands, but hundreds of cyber professionals, intelligence people, both in military and civilian agencies, as well as critical infrastructure. So equipping hundreds of people with Record the Future and just seeing their work that they're able to do. So very, very compelling, and it is good. It's good for everybody in this room too, because as they're doing that, when they're uploading malware or when they're finding correlations and so on, those data points come back to Record the Future through, I'll talk more about that, our collective insights setup, and you benefit from that. So some real goodness there. And I think this invasion here demonstrated to all of us that we live in a new world, and where it is just very, very interconnected in a way that I sort of think might have sort of been surprising to many. And if you think about it, sort of whether it's sort of companies, their supply chains around the world, be it sort of IT outsourcing, that reaching to places that you might be surprised about, food shipments, supply chain writ large, all kinds of interesting angles. Companies doing business in Russia unwillingly or willingly, seeing their goods showing up in Russia, all kinds of interesting things. And it's led, we can notice this, it's led management teams and boardrooms to start asking geopolitical questions in a way that, at least for as long as I've done this, which now adds up to a bunch of years, have never seen. And I think probably true for many people here in the room, that geopolitics have sort of suddenly become a core part of cyber, which is, very, very interesting. I'm a big fan of this picture because it sort of shows this interconnectivity between the world and the internet. And again, this point that I was making about slowly the world sort of migrating onto the internet. And I think we're sort of seeing maybe three things in all of this that are particularly interesting, or I don't know, compelling, but depending on how you look at it. So take a company like Recorded Future, where I like to say that, we have a lot of compute in our hands. We take in a lot of data, and we process a lot of data, and we do a lot of things with it. So we're a lot of compute on our hands. But at the same time, we own just about zero servers. We own no servers. Probably not really true. I'm sure there's one of our engineers in the room who will say, we do own a server, but whatever. More or less. And it's sort of pretty telling that, be it sort of the business systems or the technical systems, what have you, of all organizations are just being spread across the internet. Maybe I can say spread as Marmite instead of spread as peanut butter here, being in England. And sort of as that's happening, for sure, we start seeing this. Everybody always talks about the stronger than you most vulnerable part. And this is happening in an incredible fashion. Number two, these parts, as they're being spread out, we do have a chance of collecting data from them. So that's compelling, that's exciting. And I think what we're going to see here is sort of, instead of receiving security alerts from these systems as they're going to be spread out, we need to sort of switch to a mindset where we're actually collecting data in a way that data streams, data points, what have you, and where we can actually think about this as something that we can do math on. You call it math, stats, analytics, AI, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't really matter. But it can't be any more about consuming alerts and people sitting clicking on alerts. We're going to transform this into math, and I'll just use that word without being pretentious about it. And I think it actually promises sort of a world where that math can be used for both analysis, it can drive automation, but maybe that math on what we're collecting could actually become controls, security controls themselves, in themselves. Pretty exciting, I think. So hopefully we'll be able to keep that discussion. And then thirdly, of course, the sort of the third observation here ends up being that in this sort of world where everything is spread out across the internet, spread out as Marmite, again, if you want, in that world, we're sort of seeing the difference between what's inside and outside just sort of goes away. There is, the idea that there is a hard firewall between the inside of my company and the outside goes away. So now internal telemetry and external data collection intelligence, the difference might go away. And I'll come back and talk a little bit more about that here today. And I would love to sort of have any discussions in the hallways around that, because I think that takes us to a very interesting place. Now, the good news in all of this is, of course, that the internet in itself, it might be complicated, it might be spread out in all these different places, but the good news is we can collect data from it. And that was obviously the very reason we started Recorded Future back in depending on how you count, 2007 or 2009 or whatever you want, a long time ago, in a galaxy very far away. When we started the company, it was sort of the raison d'etre, if you want, that we could collect data from the internet, originally from what was sort of written at the top, and then every year drilling further and further down. And there is a promise there to be able to do something very, very good. The internet is sort of becoming the sensor of things, which is quite compelling. So Now again, remember that I said the theme for the conference is securing tomorrow, the future of intelligence. So let me talk a little bit about where we're going. I'll sort of set the stage for a few things here today, and then we're going to have a couple of sessions here this morning and on sort of more detailed product roadmap. But I wanted to sort of lay out some points here. And in general, I think we're both have been lucky at Recorded Future, but also are quite proud about how it's worked out for us to be able to, I call it just produce new stuff. Maybe I should call it innovate, but I don't sort of cringe on that word always. But just, cook up new stuff. And in many ways, we did some good sort of architectural choices at Recorded Future way back. We got on some good bandwagons in 2009. I'm sure there would have been good ways to end up on the wrong bandwagons as well. But when you interact with Recorded Future, at the core is our intelligence graph. That's where we are trying to connect the world. So here are these threat actors, be it criminals or nation states or hacktivists. Here are the tool sets that they're using, the TTPs they're trying to take advantage of. Here are the vulnerabilities that they're taking advantage of. This is the infrastructure they're running. This is these are the communication patterns we can observe in network intelligence from these bad guys operating the said sort of command and control infrastructure and have you. And then finally, here are the potential targets they're going after. Here are the companies. We mapped out 5 million companies. We'd like to think that we have pretty good handle on what are the IP space and the domains and the products running at these companies. And that graph, in which we don't necessarily talk a whole lot about at Recorded Future, but that is sort of the underpinning of everything. Yeah, maybe we should talk more about it. But the key point maybe is that the way that we get to that is sort of two things. We built an API on that, and you guys have access to that. And sometimes we do hard-built sort of integrations, be it Splunk and the like, that builds on that. And when you access that graph through our API, it's the same APIs that we use. Powerful choice, where we sort of make that symmetrical. We'll come back and talk more about collective insights, which is sort of how we're finding a new way of building interesting data. But then on top of that, whether it's Recorded Future AI or the data visualizations you worked on for a long time or worked with for a long time, or sort of playbooks and so on, and then feeding this into the various modules and applications, this all connects together in a way where things can flow up and down. Now, some of the choices we made here was already back in 2009. We thought about this as a graph, and there's other classes for sure of problems and companies where people think about the problem as a graph. But I think that is the way to think about intelligence. We put this on AWS. It could have been other multi-tenant architectures, but this fundamental idea that everybody in this room interacting with Recorded Future and beyond would be on the same instance. And that was controversial. I remember in 2012, 2013, being both large banks and government clients of ours who would be like, I will never, ever. And people it's always exciting when people say never, because never is a long time. So they say, I will never use sort of a shared or multi-tenancy sort of cloud infrastructure. And, lo and behold, they did. Eventually. And it sort of built it, in a very interesting way that in that sort of way. The fact that we've sort of built on Elastic and a couple of other sort of core data structures that we've sort of been able to build around. Another interesting point is this pipeline piece here, and without getting too much into it, Recorded Future originally sort of consumed mostly text data in a bunch of different languages. Now we consume everything from sort of malware and network, sort of NetFlow type data to images to video. So sort of truly sort of from all kinds of different data that goes through one pipeline. And again, that choice there to think about that as one pipeline ended up being very, very powerful. And then maybe one more point that I will make is that being willing to then both think about it as one big database, but then having specialized data stores when we have data that is unique to a particular domain. So this without, and in most cases, you really shouldn't even have to hear about all these details. But I think it's sort of maybe compelling just to think about it sort of like, this is why it works. And so this year, there are sort of two things that have sort of stood out in what we've been doing. So one side is, of course, on AI, and it'd be crazy if we weren't doing AI, and we were in fact proud. So Stefan, where are you sitting here? Stefan, my co-founder here, and our CTO. You should go talk to him. He's the real smart guy, by the way, here. So I think right at the beginning of the year, like Jan 3 or something, he was like, we got to get on these large language models and figure out how we can put that to work. And I'm like, okay, let's figure it out. And so we built this part that many of you have seen where we can sort of, in this case, pose a query to Record the Future and say, look, I want to know about the Russian Black Sea fleet, but only from Russian sources. And, boom, the system writes an intelligence report. And I was hesitant to say that in the beginning, but it writes the report. It's sort of remarkable that it does. And it does actually a pretty good job. It footnotes the report. It pulls in the right images. It's tagged with entities. So whether you click on Black Sea Fleet or FSB or what have you, or Sevastopol, or I can barely say Novorossiysk. But you click on any of these, you sort of can drill into the data. And this idea that a large language model can write reports, and I think this is just the beginning of that, is pretty compelling. I was nervous about this. We put this out right before the RSA conference, and we were proud because we were sort of maybe the first to put out something like this. And so I was a little bit nervous about doing that because I worried that Intel analysts would be like, it's my job to write reports. Don't get into that. But lo and behold, I guess it turns out that we've done all this work on collecting data and processing data and all of those sort of things, and with the idea of letting the analysts focus on analysis. But then the writing part, for sure, there are many analysts who wants to write and likes to write, but getting help on this, especially when you're going to do quick turnaround things, turns out that there is a room for AI there. I have no illusions that the Prime Minister's daily brief for the PDB in the US is going to be written by a machine next 5 years or whatever. Again, no illusions by that. But it is something pretty compelling. And so that was sort of step one, where you sort of summarize. And I guess it just turns out that all this work we've done over a long time on collecting data, where we have decades of Russian hacker forums and what have you, and you can just sort of get the system to summarize it, was sort of a very natural thing to go after. The second then is, and we'll be back up here and talk more about that, so I'll sort of won't do too much with it, but where you instead say, look, can't we use the AI to interact with? Because many of you, who are Record the Future users in the room, you might be like, oh, it's too complicated. There's a lot of clicks and da-da-da. It's complicated to get started. But so why wouldn't you be able to just ask questions sort of like in natural language? And again, it turns out there it is. And we launched the first version of this a couple of weeks ago. I'm sure some of you have had your hands on that. It's still early. There's a big beta sort of thing on it. So we're sort of being low-key about it. But I think this is going to take us, first of all, just to make it sort of easier to get started. But the other question here, and I think about this as sort of this is maybe a what question. Give me a summary. Like computers have always been very good about like this, show me what, like or a select statement in SQL or whatever way you want to think about it. But I want to ask questions like, why is Record the Future developing artificial intelligence technology? Or what's the implication of Record the Future developing? Or what are the second order implications? Those are questions that we typically haven't sort of pushed computers to do. My favorite example was when Prigozhin got shot down, or whatever happened, bomb shut down, they were smoking too much on the plane, or whatever happened. But 3 hours afterwards, or 2.5 hours afterwards, I asked the query to our AI, and I said, what are the implications or second order implications of Prigozhin dying? And very rapidly, before anybody had written long papers about it and so on, get a pretty incredible answer back. In fact, this is actually pretty good answer too. And then the AI actually suggests questions. What are the potential risks of putting AI chatbots into intelligence? How are Microsoft and Google competing against recorded future here? And what are the implications of cyber vulnerabilities in putting that in intelligence? So I don't know. I think, yeah, you can hear my enthusiasm here, and it's pretty cool. So we'll see. We're being open-minded about where it takes us, and would love to hear your sort of thoughts on that as we go through this here today. The other side of things is on sourcing and collecting data. If you're in intelligence, you can imagine, I always refer to our data science team, had this wonderful t-shirt at some point where it said, like, must have all the data. And that's sort of the mindset here at Recorded Future, must have all the data. And I guess as long as it's legal, as maybe another sort of add-on to the, just to be clear. But so every year, look, as I said before, we start off with what's written on the top of the internet, and then you have sort of the whole messaging world, Telegram. We get like 100 million Telegram posts every day into Recorded Future, dark web type stuff, all the stuff that was written in many different languages that made sense, all the machine data, malware, DNS, NetFlow, these types of things, images, video. There's obviously an infinite amount of information, or infinite is a big word, but there's a lot of information to go after. We're thinking a lot about how we actually intersect or connect those whole collections. How do we take, Recorded Future now gets a ridiculous amount of images every day. How do we make it so that that's intrinsically connected to the text collections in ways that you can very naturally jump back and forth through text and imagery in a way where there shouldn't even really be a difference. It's just a modality. It's still information. So how do we get those two things to be intrinsically interconnected? But I think the question that we really have been asked, though, by people like yourself in the room and around the world has been more of, okay, that's all great with all this intelligence, and I'm thrilled you got 10 billion data points, but how's that relevant to me? That's sort of like, if I think back to 2009 with Recorded Future when we were barely started, that was always the question. How's this stuff that you're showing me relevant to me? And we would do things where we would set up so you'd have a watch list, and this is my tech stack, so now I could give you the stuff that's relevant to your tech stack and so on. But the bigger sort of thing to go after, obviously, has been, what about if I could actually make this relevant to what you're seeing in your EDR in CrowdStrike, or in what you're seeing in Splunk, or what you're seeing in Okta, or what you're seeing in Cloudflare, what have you, any proof point, any of your sort of security architecture. Now, ServiceNow, whatever it now may be, that gets compelling. So again, many of you have seen these sort of visualizations that we put out earlier this year. It's our threat map and what threat actors, in this case, coming at sort of a generic software company. I see them prioritized by the intent of these threat actors to go after this industry, and on the x-axis of their sort of ability to come after specifically me. So that's good, but why shouldn't this be informed by my own telemetry, what I'm seeing in my systems? So that's sort of what we've called collective insights at Recorded Future, where we can now connect to, and here's just a small set of the examples here. I think we're connecting to 10 or 11 systems by now, and we're going to aggressively go after that to be able to sort of connect to all kinds of different things. And what that then allows us is to make that threat map not just be generic, but actually not just sort of in theory map to your world, but actually based on who's actually knocking on your door. And if we now know who's knocking on your door, and we can see that in the context of a threat landscape, now we can click on them and say, now go hunt for those. And so you've seen our Sigma rules and our YAR rules and those sort of things that we have in the Recorded Future. And we want to make it so that not just be able to download those sort of Sigma and YAR rules, but actually deploy them straight into the operational system. And now I think we can sort of really, truly be intelligence-led about how we actually sort of not just sort of be informed about what these guys are doing and trying to come into our systems, but actually nail them and really eradicate them out of the system. So yeah, pretty exciting. And then of course the other sort of question that we can then do is to look at that from an anonymized or a non-attributable sort of way to say, what are other companies in my industry seeing? Or what are other people in this particular geography seeing? So, there's some pretty incredible questions that we can come after like that. Anyway, so with that, I'm going to wrap up by saying that, we've done a lot of progress at Recruiter Future. We're just bypassed $300 million of sales. Super exciting. There's 1,000 of us who work on nothing but doing intelligence. I always like to make that point. You can feel confident that we're not going to suddenly come along and say, let's create a firewall, or here's the Recruiter Future EDR, or here's the Recruiter Future I don't know what. You're going to, confidently know that we're going to focus on intelligence and keep doing that. We're going to drill into sort of what we can do in intelligence in every way there is. And we're not going to be very lazy, as you can get the sense from what I'm talking about here. We're going to very aggressively go after it, but it's still 100% intelligence. And finally, I'll just say, remember, put us to work. That is has become my rally cry whenever I meet a client or whenever it's sort of in front of a room like this. We're here to help you. And so put us to work. And with that, thank you very much.